We define ourselves through our history, culture, and food, but we so rarely think to stop and ask, how does it all work? Revealed examines the hows and whys while pulling the curtain back on things you never thought to ask. On this episode, we dig into the history of Greenwood Cemetery and its 478 acres.
To me, this is the cream of the crop. This is the Rolls Royce of cemeteries.
It's a green oasis.
Greenwood was founded to preserve and memorialize the life of New Yorkers that then passed away.
We're talking about it being death. It's the last great taboo.
Greenwood Cemetery is a national landmark made up of 478 acres and located in the heart of Brooklyn. Adorned with rolling hills, lush gardens, serene ponds, and open fields. This historic space serves as the final resting place for nearly 600,000 permanent residents.
This is a kind of who's who of old New York, so if you turn your back, you're like, oh, it's that guy.
For many of the people who are interred here, their names have not been uttered in generations.
Greenwood is still an active cemetery and a place of remembrance.
We have funerals happening here every day, so we have to make sure that this place looks really good.
But beyond its role as a final resting place, it's evolved into a cultural and educational hub.
People really need perspective on death and they need education surrounding it.
We are in the process of a pivot from just a burial ground to a public park, to a sculpture garden, to a birdwatcher's paradise, to make this place available and open and welcoming to the public to come in here and engage.
So I'm normally up in the morning by 5:30. Leave my house around 6:15. I hate the BQE. And work normally starts first around 8 o'clock. I do a little bit of everything here. I do grave digging, I do restoration. I'm also a crematory operator, certified. I love this place. This is my home. I'm here more than I'm with my own family.
Since 2004, Gus has been a caretaker at Greenwood. He has seen it all, and most recently worked through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Crazy. That's what I can say. Overwhelming.
Greenwood remained open to the public during the pandemic, serving as a haven for the community, just as it has done for nearly 200 years.
This place is full of so much history. It's like a hidden treasure.
For the past 22 years, Jeff Richmond has studied Greenwood's past as the cemetery's resident historian.
So around 1980, I started collecting stereo views from 19th century New York, and then kind of branched out into some place called Greenwood Cemetery, and just knew that there were some wonderful photographs. I came in here and I was just fascinated by the place. You would come through the gates of the cemetery and you would be in a different world. You would leave your worldly concerns behind to visit, commune with nature, to see the heavens reflected in the ponds, and really have a religious experience.
Greenwood's origins intertwine with the development of Brooklyn and New York City. It was established in 1838, and its founding was at the time part of a trend.
Greenwood exists as part of what was called the rural cemetery movement, and then starts in Paris and then came to the United States. Henry Pierpont threw himself into the idea of a Greenwood cemetery. He looked at Manhattan, he saw very, very expensive land prices, but then he looked at Brooklyn and realized that this might be the spot for him. And he got himself appointed to the just emerging Brooklyn Commission to lay out the roads, and didn't run any roads through this space in the hope that someday the land would be available. And then they had the advantage that this was on a terminal moraine, which means hills and means rocks. not suitable for farming, not suitable to be built on, but wonderful for a rural cemetery.
Greenwood came to be as a response to the lack of adequate burial grounds in the rapidly growing urban sprawl that was Manhattan. But getting people to buy into the idea was not without challenge.
The cemetery in its early years is struggling. And it's struggling because it's really this revolutionary idea. You're no longer going to be buried in the churchyard of the church you attended. Now you're going to be here with Episcopalians and Presbyterians and Lutherans, and people are reluctant to buy into that. And so the powers that be here at the cemetery kind of huddle together and say, how are we going to get people interested in visiting the cemetery at the very least?
In order to attract people to the cemetery, a somewhat modern plan was devised. Find someone famous.
DeWitt Clinton was the most revered of New Yorkers in the first quarter of the 19th century. He had been the first mayor to occupy what is still City Hall in Manhattan. So they reach out to his son at a time when other cemeteries were competing for those remains, and they get his son Charles Clinton to agree to dig his father up and to bring the remains here to Greenwood. And there's tremendous excitement in New York. There are prints issued of this is the spot where someday DeWitt Clinton's monument will be erected and he will be interred. And in 1853, this is the front page story in the Illustrated News, that this is going to be on display in Manhattan City Hall Park and then pulled by oxen down to the East River and barged across and then brought to Greenwood Cemetery. And there's much fanfare and much speechifying, and it is unveiled, and there is tremendous excitement, and the cemetery is really financially sound going forward.
As Brooklyn grew, so did Greenwood.
So Greenwood is one of the major tourist attractions in America in the 1850s, just a couple of decades after it had been founded. Niagara Falls and then Greenwood Cemetery, 500,000 people, just a remarkable number given the relatively lower population of that period, certainly as compared to today. We're visiting Greenwood every year.
The cemetery was becoming a central hub for leisure before Central Park or Prospect Park.
Greenwood became the argument for Central Park.
Over the years, DeWitt Clinton, Greenwood's first famous resident, would be joined by other notable New Yorkers.
Frank Morgan, the Wizard of Oz, is here. Boss Tweed, Horace Greeley, brand names, Durkee and Squibb and Pfizer and F.A.R. Schwartz. Leonard Bernstein, the great conductor, the maestro of the New York Philharmonic. I would say that the person who receives most pilgrimages from around the world is Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Also interred are New Yorkers whose names might not be as famous, but whose stories are just as important to the history of New York.
Clarence Mackenzie, Civil War drummer boy. Clarence was 12 years old, and his unit, the 13th New York, was called up when the Civil War began. Clarence proudly marched at the head of the 13th Regiment as it went off to Annapolis, Maryland. And in Annapolis, Clarence and another drummer boy who had borrowed a musket from the cook were practicing holding their muskets and firing, and didn't realize that the cook had loaded his musket. And his hand came against the trigger, and the bullet ricocheted and hit Clarence. And Clarence became the first casualty from Kings County in the Civil War at the age of 12, and was initially buried just down the hill to my left in a single grave there. And his dog lay at the grave for a week, refusing to leave his side.
Today, Greenwood is a hodgepodge of new and old. Caring for the nearly 500 acres that make up Greenwood is a job for the restoration department, working year-long to keep everything looking good.
For this project, like many other projects, I'm repointing this mausoleum. So repointing means replacing the original mortar with new mortar. And the important thing about this is that we're replacing it with the type of mortar that would have been used originally. So it has the same kind of characteristics that the mortar in 1850 would have had. The whole thing that we're doing here is restoration, right? Nothing I do should interfere with the original stone. And it's really important that we work carefully and neatly. This is not a speed game. This is taking your time, making sure you're using the right material. And we really have to take a level of responsibility for the work that we do.
Neela has been working at Greenwood for 7 years. Her and her team work to maintain mausoleums, gravestones, and sculptures, some almost 200 years old.
You're like a dentist. I have a whole thing of dental tools in there, yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So as the Director of Restoration, it means that I'm in charge of keeping all of our almost 500,000 monuments and pieces of dressed stone looking good in terms of any repair that needs to be done or degradation that you might see. We hope to push pause on that and kind of keep it right where it's at. Could I come here and rehone this entire thing and make it look brand new? Sure, but then I would be really taking away original material from this historic site. So here at Greenwood, we have a number of departments that might seem disparate on paper, but we're all here to make this place work as best it can. Just like, any cemetery, we have to make sure that this place looks really good. We are still an active cemetery. We have funerals happening here every day, so we want to make sure that we are a safe landscape, we are inviting to the public, that we're welcoming to our lot holders, whether that be our grave department, our horticulture department, the restoration department. We're all working together all the time.
Beyond its role as a place of remembrance, Greenwood is also one of Brooklyn's largest green spaces. It was the borough's largest open space until the opening of Prospect Park in 1867. Today, it's one of the world's largest arboretums. Sarah Evans is Greenwood's manager of horticultural operations. Her team works to upkeep and care for the cemetery's rich array of plant life.
So here in the greenhouse is where we stage all of the plants that come in. They're staged here, watered, until they go out and are planted in the landscape. Some of the material here we actually propagated from seed, collected from different trees in the arboretum.
Greenwood also serves a role in Brooklyn's larger system of green infrastructure, mitigating more than 2 million gallons of stormwater and removing 12,000 pounds of pollution from the air each year. The cemetery's more than 7,000 trees also serve a purpose when their own life comes to an end.
These logs all came from trees here at Greenwood. So the age of these trees that have been milled run around about 150 years old. So they essentially started their lives at or shortly after the founding of Greenwood Cemetery. We're trying to think of ways that, where the life cycle of the trees doesn't just end at its removal, that we are salvaging the wood so that we can continue not only the story of the trees that grow in New York City, but also to just retain and keep a lot of that carbon that has been stored as they grew through their lives. Right now, they are just drying. They take about a year to dry without, the help of a kiln. And eventually, the thought is that this wood will be used for interpretation projects, education projects, perhaps visitor benches here at Greenwood. Many of these trees that are milled behind me stood over many of the funerals of the people who are interred here. And so we see that the preservation of this wood is not only of an environmental benefit, ecological benefit, but also a way to continue the story of New York City, both living and non-living.
Over here is my wife's gravestone and my gravestone. So Judy Emily Richmond and me. I had approached her with the idea of buying a grave here and thought that she would be resistant, but she was actually enthusiastic about the idea and said, well, at least I know that you'll visit me at Greenwood. So we picked out this grave and designed it. So I wanted this As a 19th century symbol of eternity, they used a globe that has no beginning and no end, and so I wanted to incorporate that idea into this. And my wife wore a pin of an angel on her lapel, and so we put that angel here. And I come here and I think about her and her rather early death, and how I now have 5 grandchildren, and how she would have loved knowing them.
The reality of death is that loss is really hard. We have a lot of work to do when we're confronting our grief. Greenwood being able to be a space where you know it's cool and okay to come bring those thoughts and ideas and work with them is incredible.
Gabrielle curates public programs at Greenwood, which include everything from concerts in the catacombs to deaf education.
I want people to come in here and know that it's a space for them to take a walk, know that it's a space for them to go to a program or enjoy a concert, a space to come mourn, but also just to hold that sacredness and to know that this place can be all of those things.
Where some might just see a memorial for the dead, others look to Greenwood for inspiration.
It's a really unique space, so I think of it as being like a 5th performer.
You are inevitably surrounded by so much history and workmanship and feeling, and that's definitely been incorporated into our performance.
Greenwood is a historic cemetery with almost 200 years of history. Every grave tells a story paramount to Brooklyn's history. But this is still an active cemetery, and in a city where space is limited, you sometimes need to get creative. It's the old joke, there are 2 guarantees in life, death and taxes. But in a city where the fight for space is an ever-present battle, room for cemeteries is hard to come by. New York is the 7th most expensive state for burials. Cremation is the cheaper option. There are even proposals for cemeteries in the sky. Meanwhile, green burials are on the rise. 60% in fact say they would be interested in the more eco-friendly option.
A green or a natural burial is really for someone that wants to have the simplest of returns, for lack of a better phrase. So a lot of folks have told me it's inherent to their spiritual beliefs. They want to just return to the earth as, organically as they came in. So you could be buried in an unfinished pine box, a wicker basket, or a shroud, as simple as that. Here at Greenwood, we believe in being as environmentally sustainable and simple as possible. Right now, we're in Cedar Dell, which is my absolute favorite place in the cemetery for both practical and poetic reasons. It is newly renovated and landscaped and our site for our natural or green burial. So there's a little bit more of this communal feel, this way of returning to the earth in a sacred space that is very community focused and based and very future forward when you think about it. Everybody here is such an important part of the ecosystem in the general life cycle.
Greenwood has been intertwined with Brooklyn for nearly 2 centuries.
I mean, it doesn't talk to Brooklyn, it shouts, right? So if you know anything about Brooklyn history and you walk here, you'll know, oh, there's Schermerhorn, there's, Remsen, there's all these folks that, for better or worse, we know their names.
It serves as a time capsule of the borough's history.
It's a constant discovery. You can walk by a space that you have walked past 100 times and notice something that you never noticed before.
The sculptures, the trees, the hills. I mean, this place can be very peaceful.
For many, cemeteries are places to avoid, but for the people of Brooklyn, Greenwood serves a different purpose.
We are a place that is so alive. We're 478 acres of life. We're a level 3 arboretum. We have so much wildlife, but we also know where we are. We contextualize it and we see it every day. We are among the dead. We are among death. We are among mourners and grievers. And to work with people that are able to hold that and show up every day and be able to help the community is incredible. As we're always expanding and growing, we also are remembering and standing, with a firm eye on our history, our past, and where this place came from.